Howdy, of you delicious people. I'm here today to review seasons 1 through almost season 3 of Fantasmagorias. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm probably ill pronouncing it, I do apologize, but otherwise, I'm sure a lot of people tell me exactly how to pronounce it and whatever for a number of times where I'm just like, meh, okay, great. Um, Really, in these episodes, I'm probably not. If there's ever a name for any number of these characters, I'm not going to go to specifics with names. But I'm just going to kind of tell quickly a lot of the stories that end up happening in these episodes. So, evidently, I'm doing seasons 1 through 3 uh, because they're all severely short. They're all like a minute or 2 minutes at most. And so really, what is this show about? If somebody had just bizarrely just saw this on HBO Max and was kind of interested in what this was. So, like, honestly, to me, this show kind of very much like reflects like a Tales from the Crypt kind of thing, but done in a much more like rapid kind of speed. For a lot of people who watch shows like Supernatural, like a lot of people would kind of connect with a lot of these episodes. Yes, they are rather like short, but if anything, I kind of find like some of the stories to be rather intriguing, where they kind of go into chupacabras or any number of just interesting stories that are eventually to be happening here with like kidney thieves and stuff like that. It's a really interesting show, even though every single episode is super really short. Like I would just be like, why can't they just like have one long stretch of an episode? And but I guess they're just like, no, we just want to trickle these out just fairly quickly. I guess they just naturally assume that a lot of people are impatient, or it's just like one of those where it's like, hey man, like it's really hard to do all of this, to do all this artwork. Like it probably takes like a week to get all this like drawing done and all this animation and whatever. And so like really just the actual uh like Arthur part is probably the easiest part of this whole entire thing, this whole entire stretch of things. Um, I actually thought that there was something intriguing about this show. Like I actually thought like the way they approached this. Supposedly, this story was a true story. So it kind of trickles down as like this ghost story kind of a show where eventually you'll find out like some story is supposedly real, but you kind of have to question it every single time. Just be like, wait a minute, what? Like, how is it that all of a sudden supposedly this ghost story is to be true? Um, but yeah, you'll also see like the narrator eventually having to narrate like every single person. So reasonably, whoever is to actually have actual like voice things in here, like the narrator is to basically do everyone's voice. So like of course, because why wouldn't they? Because this thing is so quickly done that it's just like, hey, like we're not going to be paying a ton of actors to all do this whole thing. Like basically, this is a ghost story that is to be told by one person. And so like yeah, like I thought there was something about this that I enjoyed. Like I thought that this show was rather fun. um and plus also, yeah, for a lot of people that are to uh like go into like supernatural things, this show will also be for you. But yeah, so kind of an interesting show. I really enjoyed it, but I think other than that, I don't think there is much to say beyond that. Uh, Really, yeah. So, weirdly, they do some like there is certain kind of weird patterns in this show. Also, like they tend to do a lot of weird things with babies in this show, which I'm like, for some people that don't want to hear like a ghost story about a baby, maybe this might not be for you. Like they do some oh my god things to like babies in some parts of the show. But also there's some things that they end up doing with kids where kind of kids will probably end up going and killing off their parent or vice versa for whatever reason. Um, but yeah, so like this may be for some people or it might not be for others, but if people like the kind of ghost tale of a show and don't mind that these episodes are really short, because I have to like, because for me I'm like, dude, like this is like a 2 minute like per episode, and I'm just like, dude, I'm gonna be watching like a whole entire season. Like I'm not gonna just watch one episode and then just call it a day and be like, hey guys, let's review the one episode. No, I can't do that. Like to me, I'm like, did this show end up like on a Quibi or something like that? Because like if you go into Quibi, like each episode is like 8 minutes or less, and like I don't know, this could have been like popped out as like some movie or something, and like could have been like trickled down as whatever. But anyway, so yeah, that's I think all that I wanted to say about this show. But I'm not gonna retry and say again the title because I think I'm gonna mess it up. So let's go into spoiler time. Just kind of quickly talk about all these episodes because reasonably, a lot of the episodes are just about like a minute or 2 minutes in time. So we're gonna kind of quickly kind of bust out most of these, most of the tales. So it is spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we do spoil this episode. So I even caught the very last episode of season 3. So this is when I talk about season 3, it'll be episodes 1 through 4. So like it won't be a complete season 3. I'm gonna wait till like season 4 comes out, and like a lot of those like a bulk of like I'll wait till season 4 ends up finishing if there's going to be a season 4, and then I'll just kind of like play it out to just kind of see like going back into this, and then that's gonna suck because I'm gonna have to like, yeah, this is gonna be season 3, episode 5, but then also season 4. But like I'll just have to mitigate or whatever that I'm gonna cover. Like there'll be some covering to go through to just finish up the season 3 when eventually I get into season 4. So like I'll have to wait till season 4 all comes out, and then I'll eventually cover the last season or the last episode of season 3, and then cover season 4. So we'll do that. So let's get into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time we spoil the show. So the very episode is called "The Weeping Woman," which a lot of people who know like Supernatural and like I just caught like the very first episode of Supernatural, and of course it is about the Weeping Woman. So we have a woman who is to like have a like a child with a man who is already like to be with a woman, and so this man had decided that he was to go off and marry this woman and leave his other wife behind. And so this woman decides that, okay, well, I trust this man, so she ends up going off with her 2 children that she has with this man. And so this woman ends up going on to like going to the church waiting for this man, and this guy of course never shows up. So we had this woman who is of course like severely distraught and decides, well, like she ends up taking both of her children to a fountain, and of course like you would naturally assume that these children were sadly drowned, and that this woman like was so distraught about this whole thing that she is to be howling throughout the town, screaming in agony for the man that had technically betrayed her. So that's like the covering of episode 1. Episode 2 is kind of a little weird. So episode 2 is called The Babysitter. So the story of this is that this couple is to have this babysitter come on in, and they really do trust her, and so like, okay, great. So eventually they end up coming home one night to all of a sudden have this meal prepared for them, and so they're like, you know what, like this is a really good meal, like this is great, like what is this? And so we end up finding out that the babysitter had cooked the baby to the parents. And so they're like, oh my god. So that's like technically what happens in the bulk of episode 2, weirdly. So episode 3 is Organ Thief. Organ Thief, we have this big executive who ends up bumping into this one woman. And so this guy ends up, of course, going to this guy's home on the very first date. They get very sloshed, get very drunk, leading to this guy going back into their bed. To eventually, once this guy wakes up, all of a sudden he is in his bath because his kidney is taken. And so, yeah, man, does that suck. So, yeah, like, pretty normal story. Episode 4 is to supposedly have an image that, like, isn't the correct image, bizarrely. HBO, get onto your freaking, like, stuff. Because this isn't correct. Because this image is for, I think, another episode that eventually I'll get to. Episode 4 is called The Whistler, where supposedly we are to have a guy that is to have a lovemaking sesh with a woman, where all of a sudden his father is to come in on these two having this relationship, and he doesn't accept this relationship, and so the man is just like, well, like, too bad. And so this guy ends up going and taking a pitchfork to his father's back because of this. So we end up having the grandfather finding out that this man had killed his own father, and so we have this grandfather who repetitiously continues to whip this man to death to eventually have him come back and just be going through parts of town with this weird looking hat on and evidently the sack of his father's remains. And he is to consistently whistle some little tune, and supposedly if the whistle is way too far, it's to actually be close, and if the whistle is to be close, he's way too far, and bizarrely. Weird episode, kind of a weird end of the episode, but yeah, like, so there isn't much of any actual, like, most of the time you just kind of get like, oh, this so-and-so person and that so-and-so. There's not like, it's like a real quick to the draw kind of approach to a lot of these, but and of course also you just have this like narrator who's kind of like introing in his little ditties or his little things, where eventually you just start seeing him like carving somebody up or burying some body or whatever. Like very little is to be understood about like the beginning or ending sequences that have the cigarette wielding narrator. To just be like, okay, you start to see little images here and there of like, I think him like tearing apart some people that I thought was from other episodes, but I didn't quite understand all that together. Like, I think in the very first end of season 1, we end up seeing him, I think, like murdering somebody or burning somebody alive, I think, towards the end of this this first season. But anyways, the next episode is to be Ghost Passenger. Like, to me, this kind of feels like a tale as old as time, but it also feels like another, like, supernatural kind of episode. We have this guy who is to eventually be this salesman, and he's kind of just driving along. All of a sudden, he is to find some woman on the side of the road, and he ends up picking her up because he's lonely. Eventually, this salesman ends up going and dropping this woman off, to eventually, by the time he ends up like dropping her off at this house location, she ends up bizarrely vanishing. So we have the salesman who ends up deciding to go up to the house, knock on the door, and have this like scarf of this woman. And so all of a sudden we have this old lady who is to be like some like mother of this blonde woman that the salesman was to have in her car. And so this old lady's like, hey, like, this is the scarf of my daughter who had died 4 years ago. And so then bizarrely we have this salesman who's like, "Oh my god!" And then he ends up like running off and he's like driving crazy. He's like, oh my god!" Like, what a goofy tale towards the end of there, where we have this just like guy who just is like crazily just acting odd. Season two. So for people keeping track, season two, because these things are going to be like banging out. So this episode is called The Chupacabras, which a lot of people have seen probably a number of supernatural kinds of shows. A lot of people have probably heard Chupacabra come up somewhere. Or maybe there's a whole entire show dedicated to Chupacabra. I don't know. So, mostly in this episode, we have some rich guy who is to have this goat farm, who is to have supposedly been torn apart by something, and this guy naturally assumes that this goat farm is torn apart by the two dogs of his neighbor. And so we have this guy going into his neighbor and it's like, "Hey, like, your dogs obviously tore up my goats." And this old man who is to have these two dogs is like, "No, it's not. Like, it was the Chupacabra." And the guy is just like, "Whatever. Like, if anything, like, I'm going to get even with your dogs. And then I'm going to get even with you." So this guy ends up running back to get to this old man and his dogs. So this guy ends up popping and sadly killing both of these dogs, going into the house looking for the old man. We end up finding out that the old man is to tell this man, "Well, like, you were wrong. Like, I told you the truth. It was the Chupacabra after all." Because the old man is actually the Chupacabra. And so this old man goes and kills this this other man and just tears him apart. Which I was like, well, yeah, that's an interesting story. Just like, the guy was telling the truth the whole time. It's like, you should probably have backed off. And so, moving on. So, the next episode is called the Sayona. So, this episode is to be an episode, I think, about an affair, if I'm correct. So, what eventually happens in this episode is we have a woman who is to have been driven away from her home, and we have a man who is supposedly having an affair with this woman's mother. And so the driver is to eventually tell this woman the truth. The driver is to mention to this woman, "Hey, just letting you know that your husband and your mother are having an affair." And so that pushes this woman eventually to rush on home and quickly go off because she has her baby. We all of a sudden have her go home, and her husband is just kind of walking through the house, and all of a sudden sees this baby laying on the ground. And so he's like, "Well, frickin', this is my child." So this man picks up his baby, finding out that his baby is covered in gasoline. And I'm like, whoa. So we have this woman who all of a sudden lights the match to not only light like this man on fire, but her baby as well. And so then eventually she has a gun, and she ends up turning a gun on her own mother. And so the mother ends up saying, it's like, "Hey, like, the reason why we were so secretive is because we were planning your birthday. And, like, the driver lied to you. We were planning your birthday the whole time. This is why me and your husband were so secretive." And so all of a sudden the driver walks in and he's like, "Ah." And so the woman ends up going and killing the driver and then shooting herself. Because eventually her mother is to mention, like, you are going to be forever a vengeful spirit. And supposedly, we are to have this woman forever walking the earth, being this, like, if someone is ever going to have an affair, like, she's going to get after them, and so on and so forth. So, the next episode is to be called Cursed Twins. So, we have these twins that, like, aren't, I guess, to be watched very well by their mother. They're to be holding, like, dual balloons. And all of a sudden the balloons go flying off, and so the twins go running after the balloons to eventually have a car take them both out. So, what ends up happening is this woman, luckily later, ends up having a very strong relationship with her husband even after this whole, like, horrific event. And so they end up having more children, and coincidentally they happen to have twins yet again. So what ends up happening is this mother ends up being a lot more cautious about their twins and tries to protect them, and, like, really tries to make them safe at all times. So coincidentally, this mother and these two kids, or these two twins, are walking right by the exact same road where the original twins had been killed off. So all of a sudden we have the mother who is to start, like, walking through the road, and the kids stop and say, like, yes, mother, this is where you killed us. And so the mother is just like, say, what now? All of a sudden we see a car, like, going and killing this mother, running her off, or running her over and killing her. And so the kids just become orphans and whatever, and just they end up just eventually just, like, I guess they had the souls of the original twins, I guess, at one moment. Or maybe they were just, like, they were possessed. The other twins just were possessed with the original twins. I don't know. But anyways, pushing on. So, the next episode is Luigi Board, or Luigi, or they pronounce it differently in this episode. I think they call it Ouija, or something different. But of course, I just call it Luigi, because Luigi Board, I don't know. So, what ends up happening is we end up having two kids who end up going and camping, and they end up doing a Ouija board. And so what ends up happening is they channel the spirit that eventually goes and like does stuff to the Ouija board. And so all of a sudden, like, these kids get so scared that they start running around this forest. And all of a sudden we have one kid who ends up seeing this spirit of some monsterish character. And so this guy, or this kid, to defend himself, gets a blade out and stabs this thing, to find out that he himself had stabbed his brother. And so it seems like the parents, who were so distraught after this whole event, ended up hanging themselves, like, bizarrely. Or not bizarrely, but, like, horrifically. So the next episode is to be Casa Te Tona, if I'm saying that correctly. I'm even trying to, like, remember which one this is, because I think, let me pause here for a second. What? Okay, this is another one where, like, the image isn't correct either, so it's just like, yeah, like, freaking HBO Max, like, get on it. Because this episode is the Hansel and Gretel episode. Like, it kind of, like, was just like that. So we have two kids who end up stumbling upon this home, and then they decide that, like, they are to eventually go and kill this old lady that is kind of holding them up. to try to scramble out of here, and they also try to like grab all the money that this old lady was to have. And so what eventually ends up happening as they try to scramble outside of this place that they're being held at, we end up finding out that this is a home of which that they cannot leave, and this place ends up like locking down. And so we end up finding out the old lady isn't exactly dead. And so the old lady picks both of the kids up and like smacks them together to basically just kill them off. Like basically having them having this be the story of like these kids should have never gone into a place that like obviously they weren't welcome, or obviously should not have just been a place they should have went into anyways. Because curiosity will kill. So like that's what kind of leads to like the tail end of that one. So season 3, episode 1, El Amada del Plumas, or Plumas. I want to see Plumas. What is even this episode? Good God, why can't these be consistent images? Because I plucked the images freaking from alright, I'm looking at the HBO Max thing and I'm trying to figure out what all these are, and so yeah, I'm trying to like assess what they all are, and it's just like, what is this? Let me pause here for a second. Yeah, the images for this one sucks. The images for season 3 sucks. Like you couldn't tell what any of these are. They're awful. So, episode 1 is to be about a man and a woman who are together, and so it seems like this woman ends up finding out that eventually like her husband doesn't have any real true feelings for her, so she ends up just going and having just like the worst possible cold, to where eventually when she goes and rests her head to sleep, she ends up finding out that she's getting a much more horrible condition every single day. And so eventually we end up finding out, after this man is to eventually go and like have this woman sadly enough pass away, he ends up going and taking her pillow, and he ends up finding out that there was to be some kind of bird parasite inside of her pillow. And so we end up finding out that the bird parasite was something that was sucking the life out of this woman. And I guess there are certain parasites that end up in like pillows because like feathers, of course. So like that was just kind of a weird, absurd like episode. But moving on. So the next episode after that, La Mineca Mandita, or Maldita. I'm gonna ill pronounce that. I apologize. The next episode is to be about good God. God, these last ones should be really easy, but they're not. I think this is the one about the doll episode where, yeah, it is. We have a mom who is to have a daughter that has a doll that is to seemingly be like a very disturbing looking doll. And so the mom decides, well, hey, I'm going to buy a better looking doll, like a doll that this mother would accept for her daughter to have. So what ends up happening is like this this daughter spends a lot of time with like the demented looking doll, and so what eventually ends up happening is eventually the mom is to eventually see her daughter at the end of this flight of stairs, and the demented doll is to come to life and stab the mom in the back of the leg, forcing this mom to fall down this flight of stairs. And eventually from then on out, eventually the daughter ends up with of course another part of the family, and she stays with she sticks with the demented doll. And so like that episode is just really just goofy. So the last episodes should be pretty easy. Like the yeah, I probably don't have the whatever. I don't have the titles for the last episodes, but I know, of course, what the last 2 hour are. So, this next one is to be about an episode where it's to be at a school, and so one girl is, of course, to have a boyfriend. All of a sudden, the boyfriend is starting to look at this other girl, and he's like, like, you know what? She's probably really enticing. All of a sudden, the guy is to go and to basically right out in front of this hallway make out with this other girl. And so we all of a sudden have this one blonde of a girl who is to eventually see a rat in her locker. And the one girl who had the guy first is now telling her it's like, hey, like, you should no longer be with my boyfriend. Like, if anything, he was mine first, blah, 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 blah. So eventually it just gets so like this whole relationship just gets so like crazy that this woman just keeps seeing this guy anyways. And so this girl goes into the bathroom stall with this weapon to eventually take and kill this blonde, I guess, in this bathroom. And so this blonde ends up going and sitting like kind of like putting her like feet up against this toilet seat. And by the time the woman with the weapon comes into the bathroom stall, we have this woman who ends up cracking her head over the toilet seat because she slips and falls, cracks her head on the toilet seat or something like that. So there's blood coming from this bathroom stall. This girl opens the bathroom stall who has the weapon, finds out the girl is dead already, walks off. But here's the thing. Every woman that is to eventually go into this bathroom after that is to eventually die. And so it just kind of gets to the point where, like, a lot of people ends up going into this bathroom stall, either ends up in madness or whatever kind of something. So eventually we had the vengeful girl with the weapon go back into this bathroom stall to eventually, like, think that she's hearing a noise from the bathroom stall. She opens the door of the bathroom stall to eventually have the spirit come at her and try to break all of her bones and kill her. Because, like, I guess this vengeful spirit who accidentally died because of this woman is eventually going to go after her and take her down. So, the very last episode is to, like, cover some kind of demon, which, of course, I don't have the info, like, the name of, but it's, like, basically the title of the episode. So we have this kid who is to decide to go on and eat way too much, I guess, in one full sitting. And so this mother is to tell this kid, like, hey, like, don't eat too much or, like, you'll get taken by this monster. So this kid is just like, that's just a legend. And so we end up having this kid who is to end up going to sleep, and of course this demon ends up coming for this kid and ends up supposedly like sucking the life out of him, because supposedly this demon had killed this kid because he had supposedly ate too often during some portion of the night, like basically killing this guy by overeating, supposedly. Which just leads to eventually having this demon kind of just being showcased as this episode. So, yeah. I think that covers a bulk of it. But yeah, so I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.